My dad handed my 8-year-old daughter a birthday card that read, "Award for the least pretty grandchild." Laughter came from the table. I ripped it in half and said this. Then my 72-year-old grandpa stood up and said something that changed everything. After that, my parents' lives began to fall apart. My dad handed my 8-year-old daughter a birthday card that read, "Award for the least pretty grandchild." She read it out loud in front of everyone. And they laughed. My mom, my sister Dana, Uncle Dan. Even my dad smirked like he'd just dropped a comedy bomb. Ivy stood there in her little yellow dress, holding that card like it meant something. Her smile collapsed and she went quiet. I walked over, took the card from her hands and ripped it in half. No one was laughing anymore. I said, if this is what passes for humor in this family, maybe it's time we stop pretending we're even a family. My mom rolled her eyes. My dad said Ivy was too sensitive and I was blowing it out of proportion. Dana muttered something about me always starting drama. I didn't even respond. But then my grandfather stood up. He's 72, keeps to himself, never gets involved in any of our messes. He's always been quiet at family events, watchful but silent. So when he stood up and cleared his throat, the table actually fell silent. Even the kids stopped talking. He looked straight at my parents and said, "Enough." Then he turned to me. He said, "I've watched this for years. The way they treat you. The way they treat Ivy. They don't care about anything but money and appearances." He paused, looked at everyone sitting around the table, then added, "I'm rewriting my will. Everything I have, my house, my land, every cent, is going to Ivy. Not a dime to her grandparents. Not to her aunt. Only Ivy." My dad choked on his drink. My mom froze. Dana stared like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. But my grandfather wasn't finished. He said, "I gave you chances. I gave you help when you asked. And all I ever got in return was entitlement and disrespect. It ends today." No one moved. No one said anything. Except Ivy. She came back outside with her cake and sat beside me like nothing had happened. She didn't even ask about the card. She just leaned into me and asked if we could light the candles again, since she didn't get to blow them out the first time. That was the moment I realized something. My daughter was stronger than all of them. And my parents, they were about to lose everything. The party ended fast after that. People made excuses, packed up early. My mom pulled my dad aside and started whispering furiously. Dana walked straight to her car without even saying goodbye. No one helped clean up. My grandfather left quietly without another word. Just a nod to Ivy as he walked past her. She smiled and waved like nothing unusual had happened. But I knew everything had changed. That night around 11 p.m. my mom called. She went straight into panic mode, asking if Grandpa was serious, asking what I knew, what I told him. She said it was cruel to punish them over a harmless joke. I didn't answer any of it. I just said, "You made your own bed." She hung up on me. 2 days later, Dana showed up at Grandpa's place uninvited. She brought her kids, acting sweet, trying to make conversation, trying to be seen. He didn't even let her inside. She stood at the door for 20 minutes until she realized she wasn't getting anywhere. Then the money talk started. My dad called me 4 times in one day. No hello, no small talk. Just demands. What exactly did Grandpa say? When did he change the will? Did I pressure him? Did I manipulate him somehow? I said, "You embarrassed an 8-year-old girl in front of her entire family. That's why he changed it. He did that." He said, "That little brat's not getting everything." He hung up. A week later, Grandpa met with his lawyer. It was official. Ivy was now the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. House, property, cash, retirement, everything. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know he'd already drawn it up. That same week, Dana posted some fake sentimental tribute about the importance of family on Facebook. A friend of mine sent it to me. I laughed. Then things got worse for them. I found out through a mutual connection that my parents were behind on their mortgage. They'd taken out loans years ago expecting that my grandfather's inheritance would cover it all eventually. My dad's business had been struggling. My mom had credit card debt they'd been hiding. And Grandpa had been helping them out, quietly every few months, just enough to keep them afloat. That stopped the day of Ivy's party. He cut them off. No more help. No more bridge loans. No more bailing them out. They spiraled fast. They tried begging him. Letters, voicemails, even Dana tried using her kids to guilt him. Nothing worked. Grandpa didn't budge. He came to our house instead. Just once. He sat with Ivy and helped her plant a small tree in the backyard. He never even brought it up. He just smiled and said she's going to grow up just fine. By the end of the month, my parents were drowning. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. A month after the party, my parents stopped pretending. No more fake concern. No more polite phone calls. The mask slipped completely. It started with a knock on my door. It was my dad. Alone. No warning, no heads up. Just standing there with that tight-jawed look he always wore when things weren't going his way. I didn't invite him in. He said, "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I told him if he was here to threaten me, he could leave right now. He laughed. Told me he wasn't here for me. He wanted to see Ivy. Wanted to clear the air with her. Said she misunderstood the card and it wasn't fair to hold a grudge over a joke. I told him Ivy didn't misunderstand anything. She's 8, not stupid. Then he said it. That sentence that told me everything I needed to know. He said, "You think you're so clever, don't you? Getting close to my father. Manipulating him. You don't deserve anything he's giving you. You've always been the bitter one in this family." I shut the door in his face. He stood outside for maybe a full minute before walking off. I watched from the window. No hesitation. No apology. Just bitterness. 2 days later, Dana sent me a message. It was long, dramatic, full of fake empathy. She said she missed her niece, that Ivy shouldn't be dragged into adult problems, that our family was falling apart and I was the reason. She actually had the nerve to say, "Grandpa doesn't know what he's doing. He's old, he's confused." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the next day Grandpa called me, calm as ever. He told me Dana had just tried to convince him to transfer his house into her name for safekeeping. He claimed I was unstable. Said I was using Ivy as a pawn. He said he didn't even entertain the idea. He laughed, actually. He told me this family never cared about legacy. They cared about what they thought they were owed. That's why they're angry now. Because I chose someone they can't control. Later that week, I took Ivy out for ice cream. She asked me why Grandma and Grandpa, meaning my parents, hadn't called. I told her the truth, but gently. I said some people don't know how to be kind even when they're supposed to love you. And that's not her fault. She nodded and changed the subject to sprinkles. But that night I couldn't sleep, because I realized something. All these years I kept trying to earn respect from people who didn't even understand what respect was. I gave them second chances, holidays, birthdays, invitations, space. I let things slide. I let the digs go. The favoritism. The judgment. But Ivy? She wasn't going to grow up like I did. Confused, ashamed, second-guessing her worth. That ended with me. And my parents. They'd built their lives on entitlement and expectations. Now they were watching it all fall apart. 3 weeks after the party, my parents listed their car for sale. It wasn't just any car. It was my mom's pride. Some luxury SUV she'd insisted on getting when my grandfather covered her down payment 5 years ago. She used to brag about it to friends, even parked it diagonally in the driveway like it was a status symbol. Now it was on Facebook Marketplace. I didn't comment. I didn't need to, because I knew exactly what was happening. They were broke. And not like, "Oops, we overspent this month," broke. I mean deep, spiraling, falling through the floor broke. Grandpa cutting them off didn't just hurt. It pulled the last leg out from under them. Then came the notice. My dad called me in a full panic, and against my better judgment I answered. He said the bank had started foreclosure proceedings. He swore he had it under control, that it was temporary, that he just needed a little help, maybe a short-term loan from Grandpa. Just something to keep them afloat. I told him to talk to Grandpa himself. He already had. He said he won't even return my calls anymore. That was the moment I realized something. They weren't just angry anymore. They were desperate. The same people who used to roll their eyes when I talked about how hard things had been growing up, who called me dramatic when I said they were toxic, who laughed when I cried during arguments. They were unraveling. Publicly. Quietly. Pathetically. And no one in the family was rushing in to save them. My Uncle Dan stopped returning their calls. Dana was still in touch, but only because she was trying to find her own angle. I heard through a cousin that Dana and my mom had even started fighting, accusing each other of messing up their chances with Grandpa. Ivy didn't know any of this. To her, life hadn't changed much. She still went to school, played with her friends, collected those squishy animal toys and arranged them on her bookshelf by size and color. She didn't ask about my parents anymore. But one night she left a note on my pillow. It was a drawing, her, me and Grandpa holding hands. Underneath she wrote in big shaky letters, "I'm glad we have our real family." I cried quietly in the bathroom so she wouldn't hear. A few days later my grandfather asked if I'd come with him to visit his lawyer again. I did. He updated his documents, not just the will but everything. Power of attorney, medical directives, access to accounts, all of it. He looked at me when it was done and said, "This isn't just about money. This is about who I trust." That night I got another message, this time from my mom. She didn't ask how Ivy was. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge anything that had happened. She just said, "You won't get away with this." No punctuation. Just cold, flat bitterness. I didn't answer. Because deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't getting away with anything. I was surviving. For once. And they were finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of cruelty disguised as parenting. A week later they tried something I didn't see coming. My dad filed a petition to have my grandfather declared mentally unfit. They actually tried to claim he was being manipulated. That I had coerced him into changing his will. That he was not in the right state of mind and easily influenced. Their lawyer even attached some note from Dana, claiming Grandpa was forgetting things, repeating stories, confusing names. None of it was true. It wasn't just disgusting. It was dangerous. Because now they weren't just trying to undo the inheritance. They were going after his dignity. The lawyer called us the day the paperwork was filed. Grandpa sat through the whole call quietly. When it ended he asked me to bring him his old metal lockbox. I knew the one. It sat in his closet for years. Inside was everything. Military records, IDs, a thick folder labeled, estate, even handwritten letters going back decades. He opened it and said, "They think I'm weak. They forgot who I am." A few days later he got evaluated. Officially. Psychiatrist. Cognitive tests. Full workup. He passed everything. The specialist said his clarity and memory were well above average for his age. The report shut down the petition before it even got to court. And when my parents found out, they lost it. My dad sent me this long email full of accusations. Said I poisoned the family. Said I'd turned Ivy against them. That I'd always been jealous of Dana and that this was just revenge. He ended it with, "You've made enemies out of your own blood." That word, enemies. I read it twice. That's what it came down to. We weren't family to them anymore. We were an obstacle. Dana posted a rant on Facebook a few days after. She didn't name me, but it was obvious. She talked about certain people tearing the family apart, about how money changes people, about betrayal. She made herself sound like a victim. Some people commented. A few cousins liked it. But most people stayed quiet. Because they all knew. They'd all seen what happened at the party. They saw the card. The truth was starting to leak through the cracks. Then came the final blow. Grandpa called a meeting. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. He just invited everyone, me, Ivy, my parents, Dana, Uncle Dan, to his house for a family talk. Most of them thought it was a chance to fix things. A last-ditch attempt to pull everyone back together. It wasn't. We all sat in the living room. Ivy stayed in the kitchen, coloring with one of Grandpa's old chess scorebooks. Grandpa stood in front of us and said one thing. "I know who you are. And I know who's worth protecting." Then he passed out sealed letters to each of us. Mine said everything was finalized. The estate, the trust, the rights to the house, even the savings accounts. Ivy's name was on every document. I was named executor. No one else had a say. Nothing could be contested. My dad started to speak. Grandpa raised a hand and said no more. He turned to me and said, "I want her raised in a house where no one makes her feel small." I nodded. Then we left. Ivy fell asleep in the car on the way home, holding Grandpa's chess scorebook like it was a stuffed animal. She didn't even know that her future had just been locked in, that everything they tried to steal from her had only pushed her closer to the people who actually cared. And my parents, they weren't just losing money. They were losing the only person who ever bailed them out. And now there was no one left to save them. Within 2 months, my parents lost the house. It wasn't a surprise. They'd been stalling foreclosure with every trick they could think of, claiming errors, filing extensions, even begging Dana to co-sign a loan. But no one stepped up. Uncle Dan had washed his hands of it. The rest of the family kept their distance. Everyone knew what they'd done. They moved into a rental across town. Smaller. No yard. One of those old places with stained carpet and loud plumbing. My mom tried to act like it was temporary, that they were downsizing, but everyone could see the truth. They were drowning in debt and there was no inheritance coming to save them. I didn't reach out. Ivy didn't ask about them. Not once. One afternoon I took Ivy to Grandpa's. She'd started visiting him every weekend. They had their own routines now. Gardening, checkers, even some weird shared obsession with canned peaches. She called him Old G, like he was some kind of secret superhero. That day I found them in the backyard. Grandpa had built her a small wooden bench under the tree they planted together. She was sitting on it, reading aloud from some fantasy book, and he was just listening with his eyes closed, smiling. He looked lighter. Like someone who'd finally let go of a weight he'd been carrying for years. That night, after Ivy went to bed, he handed me a letter. Not for now, he said. For someday. He didn't say what it was. A month later, he passed away in his sleep. Peacefully. No drama. Just gone. The funeral was small. Ivy wanted to read something, so she wrote a letter and folded it into his pocket. No one asked what it said. My parents showed up late. They stood in the back. They didn't speak. No one spoke to them. Afterward, the lawyer read the final documents. Everything stayed the same. Ivy inherited everything. My role as executor was locked in. But what caught me off guard was the clause Grandpa added at the end. One line, added after the birthday party. It said, "Any challenge to this will from any party will result in that individual forfeiting all items previously gifted to them by me, including monetary gifts, property use, and loan forgiveness, retroactively." In other words, if they fought it, they'd have to pay back everything he'd ever given them. And that was the final nail. They couldn't afford to contest anything. Not without digging their hole even deeper. So they stayed quiet. Bitter. Powerless. Ivy never saw them again. I struggled with that at first. Cutting them off completely. I kept asking myself if it was the right thing. But every time I saw Ivy happy, every time I saw her free from their judgment, their sarcasm, their mean-spirited jokes, I knew. She wasn't growing up like I did. She had people who protected her. Loved her for who she was. Lifted her up instead of tearing her down. And my parents, they were left with exactly what they'd spent their whole lives chasing. Nothing. They thought money was everything. And they ended up with none. But Ivy? She had a tree, a bench, a letter in her grandfather's pocket, and a future no one could take from her. That was the real inheritance. And they never saw it coming.